All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're decoding the mechanics and metaphors of literally one of history's most famous parables. We're looking at texts from the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, along with some deep historical and theological analysis, to figure out what these ancient agricultural symbols were really trying to tell us about the human mind and how it receives new ideas.
Now, this famous opening line, spoken right by the Sea of Galilee, sets up a fascinating puzzle box about human nature that we are going to unlock together. Rather than getting bogged down in super abstract theology, Jesus leveraged a completely mundane, everyday farming task happening right in front of the crowd to build this timeless psychological profile of how completely different people react to the exact same message.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover sowing the seed of truth, the hard and stony soils, choked by thorns, the great banquet invitation, and finally, the good ground.
All right, part 1, sowing the seed of truth.
To understand the outcomes here, we've got to understand the inputs. The texts tell us the sower represents Christ himself, or really any messenger. But the seed, that's where it gets super compelling. The seed is the truth, or the Word of God. Our sources point out that just like a physical seed has a germinating principle inside it, the actual life of the plant just waiting to unfold, the seed of spiritual truth contains a powerful germinating principle of spiritual life. The seed itself, it never changes. Its potential is always absolutely intact.
Moving on to part 2, the hard and stony soils.
So here's the crazy thing. The exact same, perfect seed meets completely different fates depending entirely on the condition of the soil it lands on. First up, we have the wayside. Picture a hard-beaten dirt path between farm fields, trampled down constantly by foot traffic. This represents a heart completely hardened by the busy traffic of the world. Because the soil is literally as hard as pavement, the truth can't penetrate at all, it just sits there on the surface. And the sources explain that the bird swooping in represents Satan, snatching the message away before it can make even the slightest impression on an inattentive listener.
Next, we get this vivid contrast with the stony ground. Now, we aren't just talking about soil with a few pebbles in it. This is a super thin layer of dirt sitting right on top of a solid ledge of rock. The seed actually sprouts remarkably fast here, representing folks who hear the word and immediately receive it with incredible, buoyant joy. But when the hot summer sun comes out, which the text identifies as trials, tribulations, or persecution, that superficial little plant gets absolutely devastated.
The crucial takeaway here is that because they didn't count the cost of true commitment, their shallow roots hit bedrock and they just fall away. They're basically running on good impulses and superficial feelings, right? They haven't brought the truth face to face with their actual daily habits. So the second their new beliefs invite mockery or hardship, the roots have absolutely nowhere to draw moisture from, and their spiritual life just withers away.
Which brings us to part 3, choked by thorns.
In this scenario, the seed actually takes root. It survives the scorching sun. But it's growing among thorns. The text specifically calls out 3 types of thorns. First, the cares of this world, so everyday anxieties and burdens. Second, the deceitfulness of riches, that intoxicating pursuit of wealth. And third, the pleasures of life, basically the ancient equivalent of doom scrolling or binge watching, where amusement becomes the whole point of existence. And what's really striking from our sources is the reminder that thorns grow naturally. They don't need any cultivation at all.
Our sources emphasize that these distractions end up absorbing all of the soul's time and nourishment. A person might still claim to believe, but the roots are totally starved. It's like the old habits and the new seed are fighting for the exact same real estate in the mind, and eventually those noxious weeds win. They block out the light, steal the nutrients, and the person becomes completely unfruitful.
Let's pivot to part 4, the great banquet invitation.
To really wrap our heads around this concept of distraction, we can actually look at a cool thematic parallel from Luke chapter 14. In that story, guests are invited to a massive, lavish feast, but they reject the invitation. And get this, their excuses map perfectly back to our thorny ground.
Let's look at what they said. The first guy claims he just bought a field, because apparently, in antiquity, people bought real estate completely sight unseen. This is a perfect metaphor for business overriding spiritual priorities. The second guy just bought some oxen and needs to test them out, representing the constant lure of novelty and shiny new possessions. And the third guy just got married, which goes to show how even good things, like social and family ties, can become an excuse. None of these actions are inherently evil, but they become the very thorns that crowd out the ultimate truth.
Finally, we arrive at part 5, the good ground.
Fortunately, it's not all bad news. We finally hit the fourth type of soil, representing the ideal way to receive this message. And our sources make a really vital, deep-level distinction here. Having an honest and good heart doesn't mean having a perfect, sinless heart. Not at all. It means having a heart that yields to conviction and genuinely wants to understand and obey the truth. These folks meditate on the word, they hold on to it when the sun of persecution gets scorching hot, and they absolutely refuse to let the thorns of daily life crowd it out.
And this brilliantly illustrates the abundant payoff of that receptiveness. Because the seed has that powerful germinating principle of life we talked about earlier, when it finally hits the right conditions, it just explodes with vitality. Through conflict and patience, the spiritual life gets stronger and stronger, and the final harvest is massively disproportionate to that tiny seed that was originally planted. We're talking multiplying 30, 60, or even 100 times over.
But here is the absolute most actionable takeaway from this whole explainer. The condition of the soil isn't permanently fixed. The big, overarching concept here is not some rigid determinism where you're just doomed if you happen to be a rocky path right now. The wayside, the stony ground, the thorny ground, you do not have to stay that way.
The sources highlight that through earnest effort and a little divine cooperation, anyone can break up their hardened habits. You can uproot your distractions and become receptive ground. But the garden of the mind has to be actively cultivated. Those hard-beaten paths, they need the plowshare of truth to break them open. The thorns have to be recognized and yanked out by the roots, not just given a little trim at the top. Because grace, unlike weeds, takes careful, deliberate cultivation.
There's a quote from our sources that says, "True, we cannot change ourselves, but the power of choice is ours, and it rests with us to determine what we will become." I mean, that beautifully summarizes this central thesis here. True transformation is definitely a profound process, but that initial choice to be receptive, that belongs entirely to you. The seed is perfect. The sower is faithful. Literally, the only variable in this entire equation is the soil, the current state of our own minds and hearts.
So, as we wrap up this journey through the agricultural metaphors of antiquity, it leaves us with one vital, deeply personal question to chew on. What kind of soil are you choosing to be today? Are you letting the noise of the world bounce the truth right off your hardened surface? Are you letting the thorns of anxiety and wealth choke out what actually matters? Or are you actively breaking up that dirt, ready to receive, grow, and multiply? Think about that the next time you encounter a new, challenging truth. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and we will see you next time.